Good morning, friends, and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery for another Sutta study session. And this morning we'll be continuing with Ānāpānasati Sutta from the Majjhima Nikaya. So, as usual, I'll start by paying homage to the Buddhas and then going through the Buddha's words. And you can type in questions at any time, and I'll answer them at the end. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So as mentioned, we'll be continuing with the Ānāpānasati Sutta, the discourse on mindfulness of breathing, which is from the Majjhima Nikaya, Sutta number 118. So yesterday we had gone through the introductory portions as well as the first 6 of the 16 steps. Starting with going to a suitable place for meditation, sitting down cross-legged, sitting up straight, establishing mindfulness, paying attention to your breathing, and starting with just being aware of whether your breath is long or short, whether it's fast or slow, whether it's deep or shallow, just starting with a basic awareness of the overall breathing process. Then training oneself to be aware of the whole body, so to experience your whole body as you're breathing. And as you're breathing in and out, then to gradually tranquilize and pacify and still all bodily activity. So although I spoke about this yesterday, I really do want to emphasize that. It can seem like a small thing, a small point, and therefore easy to skip over. But stilling the body, pacifying the body, ceasing all bodily activity is a very important part of samadhi practice. So if your body is not completely still, then it is nearly impossible to enter jhana. If your body is completely still, then your samadhi will advance much more quickly, and it becomes possible to enter into very deep states of concentration. So physical stillness is a very important component of meditation practice, and especially if you're trying to get strong samadhi. And realistically, you should be trying to get strong samadhi. It's part of the Noble Eightfold Path. And then the next 2 steps, so piti pati sangvedi, so while breathing in and out, we're building up a sense of euphoria in the body. And sukhapati sangvedi, so as we breathe in and out, we're building up a sense of happiness, a sense of bliss. So this is where we had left off yesterday. So this is all in cultivating mindfulness and concentration, so sati and samadhi. The next 2 steps are continuing on with that theme of developing samadhi, but turning now attention towards the mind. So the first 6 steps are all focused on the body, but now we start to turn attention towards the mind, which is why I mentioned yesterday that although the 16 steps are normally divided into 4 sets of 4, I usually think of the first 6 steps as being a distinctive group, because starting at step 7, the attention shifts from body to mind. So the 7th step is chitta sankhara patisangvedi, asisa samiti sikkati. So training oneself, I will breathe in, experiencing chitta sankhara. So chitta means mind. And sankhara, as we talked about yesterday, sankhara is most commonly translated as formations. It also has the meaning of activities or objects. And in this case, so chitta sankhara, so mental objects, mental activities, mental formations. In other words, it's being aware, fully aware of whatever mental activities are going on, fully aware of whatever thoughts or emotions are drifting through the mind, fully aware of whatever mental activities we're still engaging in. And at this point, one starts to become aware that there's basically two kinds of chitta sankhara. There's deliberate mental activities, such as when you're sitting in the meditation hall and you're like, okay, now I'm just going to space out and daydream about that book I read last week. Or now I'm going to ruminate over what's going on with the characters in my favorite TV show. Or now I'm going to plan what I'm going to do as soon as this boring retreat finally comes to an end. Like whatever it is, like this is deliberate mental activities. So deliberately produced chitta sankharas. Or it can also be intentionally bringing up an emotion or deliberately fueling an emotion that's already present. But the other form of chitta sankhara is non-volitional, so unintentional. So this is when there are thoughts and images and emotions appearing in the mind, but we don't seem to be producing them ourselves. They seem to just arise of their own accord. So these are echoes of past mental activity. They're something that we're not deliberately producing, but which are appearing in the mind because of whatever has happened with our mind in the past. And it's important to distinguish between these two, because in meditation practice, we're trying to cease all deliberate mental activity, except if you're using a meditation method which involves mental activity, then you continue with that. So for example, if you're repeating a mantra, so one of the most common mantras in the Theravada world is to repeat the Buddha's name. Actually, also in the Mahayana world, it's possibly the most commonly used meditation technique in the entire Buddhist world, across all traditions, is to choose one of the Buddha's names and to repeat that name over and over in your mind. So that's a form of deliberate mental activity, which is part of a meditation method. And therefore is okay. Of course, when getting into deep samadhi, it's necessary to stop even that mental activity. But during the earlier stages of meditation practice, that's still acceptable, because it's part of the meditation. It's leading the mind in the direction of deeper concentration. But we're trying to stop all mental activities which are not directly related to the meditation. We're trying to stop all mental activity which is not leading us in the direction of stilling mental activity. So the first layer of this, so again, chitta sankhara patisangvedi, the first layer of this is just to be aware, just to know what's going on in the mind. And to some degree, this starts happening naturally. So when you sit down to meditate, you start paying attention to your body, start to be more clearly aware of your body, then you're bringing your attention firmly into the present moment, and your body starts to act as like a projector screen, this blank, still projector screen on which you can begin to observe your mind. So of course, our mind has been active all along, but normally we're distracted, so we don't even notice our mental activity. So actually a very common complaint that I hear during meditation retreats is people come on retreat and then after a day or two, they say, oh, it seems like my mind is getting worse. It seems like I was more peaceful before the retreat started. It seems like I actually had a more peaceful mind before I started meditating. And it's like, well, no. Realistically, your mind was always this messy and chaotic. It's just that now that you're meditating several hours a day, you're starting to realize just how messy your mind is. So it's not that your mind was perfectly clean and peaceful and pure before the retreat, but rather it's that your mindfulness was weak enough that you didn't realize how messy your mind was. And now that you've been in retreat for a couple of days, you're starting to become intensely aware of your chitta sankhara. And it's been there all along. It's just now you're paying attention. So now you're fully aware. So it's important not to get discouraged. It's actually a good sign. So when you get to that point in meditation where your mind just seems to be this chaotic, disastrous mess, which is always active and always moving and always producing noise, well, congratulations. You're now aware of how it's been all along. So there's an improvement, and the improvement is awareness of your mental condition. So that's the step here. Chitta Sankhara Patisangvedi means to be completely experiencing mental activities. So this word Patisangvedi comes from the root vid, which means to know or to experience. It's the same root from which we get the word vidya, by the way, or vidya in Sanskrit. And so vidya means knowledge. It's also the same root from which we get the word vedana. So vedana, which means feeling or experiencing. And the prefix sang means complete. And the prefix on top of that, so pati, has the sense of reviewing or going back. So patisangvedi then is like this complete, thorough knowing. So chitta sankhara patisangvedi means there's this complete, thorough knowing of all the activities of mind. And this is a very important element in the development of both samadhi and vipassana. And this also is why, again, as I see it, there's a distinct shift in these meditation instructions between step 6 and step 7. Because when we're starting to develop a complete awareness of our mental activity, then this is starting to introduce a component of insight, a component of vipassana, a component of wisdom. But it also still is an important element of practicing samadhi. It's necessary to know our mental activity so that we can pacify it, which is the next step that the Buddha gives here. So the next step is pasambayang chitta sankharang asasisamiti sikkati. So while breathing in and out, one trains oneself. I will pacify mental activities. I will still mental activities. So this is similar to, in the previous paragraph, the step pasambayang kaya sankarang. So stilling body activities, bringing your body to as peaceful and still a condition as possible. So here we're trying to do the same. So as we're becoming increasingly aware of all the activity in the mind, then we try to bring that to stillness. So starting with the deliberate mental activities. So trying to stop all deliberate mental activity. And then what remains is simply the non-volitional mental activities, the echoes of past memories, the echoes of past thoughts, of past experiences, of past choices, past lives even. So those echoes that seem to just arise of their own accord and bounce around in the mind for a few seconds or longer, and then bounce right out of the mind. So as we become clearly aware of the non-volitional mental sankharas, the non-volitional objects and activities of mind, then we can observe them without fueling them. We can observe them without participating in them, without trying to either latch onto them or push them away. And in this way, then they start settling down and disappearing all on their own. So deliberate mental activity, you need to make a deliberate effort to stop doing. But the unintentional mental activities, those cease purely through non-participation. We observe them, but we don't get involved in them. We know that they're there, but we don't react to them. Then they start settling out all on their own. Then the next step that the Buddha gives is Chitta Patisangvedi Asasisamiti Sikati. So previously we had Chitta Sankhara Patisangvedi. So Chitta again is mind, and Sankhara is formations or activities, objects. So this is focusing on the objects and activities of mind. But with this step, it's simply Chitta Patisangvedi. So knowing the mind itself. So knowing the state of the mind, the condition of the mind, the mood of the mind. So this is a much more subtle base layer of mind. So normally when we look at the mind, we tend to fixate on the objects and activities of mind. But we miss out on the mind itself. So one way to understand this is like a painting. So a painting is on a surface, but the surface itself has its own texture. It has its own color. It has its own pattern. It has its own shape. So Chitta Sankhara is like the painting, whereas Chitta is the canvas. It's the surface which the painting is done on. And normally we're so fixated on the painting that we miss out on the surface. We don't pay much attention to the surface. So with Chitta Patisangvedi, we're turning our attention to the surface of the mind, to the texture of the mind, the shape of the mind itself, rather than to the objects of mind, which are floating on that surface. So Chitta Patisangvedi Asasisamiti Sikati, so to be clearly aware of the mind itself, the surface of the mind, the shape, the texture of the mind, the condition of the mind, rather than the objects of mind. And to some degree, this happens naturally. As you still and pacify mental activities and objects, then naturally what's left is the mind itself, the surface of the mind. When you clear the objects off of the surface, then you can see the surface more clearly. So perhaps a better metaphor would be if you had a table, and the table was covered in all kinds of objects. Then you can't actually see the surface of the table. You only see the objects. But as you clear the objects off of the table, then you can see what the table itself looks like. You can see the structure of the table itself. Then the next step that the Buddha gives is abhipamodayang chittang asasisamiti sikati. So while breathing in and out, one trains, I will bring the mind to a higher state of gladness. So abhipamodayang, it's from the word pamoda. So more commonly, people are used to the form pamoja. So pamoja means gladness or happiness. And this is usually defined as a more subtle, serene kind of happiness than sukha or piti. So again, piti is more excited kind of happiness, a euphoric, ecstatic kind of happiness. Sukha is a little more serene, peaceful kind of happiness. And pamoja is an even more subtle sense of gladness. So a more peaceful kind of happiness. It's also related, by the way, to the word mudita. So it's from the same root as mudita. It's also from the same root as anumodana. So this word anumodana, which means rejoicing together or being happy together. And mudita similarly has this meaning of rejoicing or appreciating the happiness that people are experiencing. So abhipamodayang, then we have the prefix abhi, which means superior. So abhipamodayang chittang means bringing the mind to a superior form of happiness, to a superior gladness. It's sometimes said that the flaw of piti sukha is that it's exciting, and excitement is by its very nature agitating. It's a little bit unsettling. So piti and sukha are wonderful, especially if you haven't experienced them before. Then experiencing this electric, ecstatic, intense euphoria in your meditation is a really wonderful thing. It's really delightful. And in fact, it's a very important step in our practice because it's what finally starts to turn our mind away from ordinary worldly pursuits. When you realize how much euphoria you can produce just by sitting still and focusing your mind, then naturally you start to be less interested in other forms of pleasure. And you start to be more interested in meditation. So piti sukha, this is a very important stage in our development, but it does also have an agitating component to it. So as long as the mind is fixated on piti sukha, then that prevents it from moving into deeper states of stillness and samadhi, which is why piti disappears in third jhana and sukha disappears in fourth jhana, because those components of mind are themselves a little bit agitating. So it keeps the mind a bit unsteady. So abhipamodayang is bringing the mind towards a superior form of happiness, a superior form of gladness, which does not have that agitating component to it. That's present in this electric or ecstatic euphoria that we call piti and sukha. So this is necessary because it's, again, it allows the mind to move deeper into samadhi, which is the next step that the Buddha brings up. The next step is samadahang chittang asasesami ti sikkati. So samadahang is a verb form of the word samadhi. So samadahang chittang means bringing the mind into samadhi, samadhiing the mind. If we wanted to smash some English grammar onto a Pāli word, you could say samadhiing the mind. So bringing the mind into samadhi. And so the word samadhi, it's worth having a closer look at this word. It literally means bringing together. So it's from the word, the verb adati, which means to bring, or to take, or to collect. And sang, the prefix sang, which again means together. So samadahang means bringing together, collecting together. So you're collecting the mind together, unifying the mind. This is what the word samadhi means. It's mental unification, mental collectedness. It's the opposite of dispersion or distraction. So instead it's collectedness, unification of mind. So often people have a kind of mystical idea of samadhi. But actually samadhi it's very simple. It's when the mind is unified. It's not scattered or distracted or dispersed. It's unified. It's completely collected together, holding together. And samma samadhi, so correct samadhi, also necessarily has the component of strong mindfulness. So if one's mindfulness is weak, then that is not samma samadhi. If one is blacking out, that's not samma samadhi. So sometimes there can be a misunderstanding So somebody sits down to meditate and they think they're getting more and more concentrated, and then they black out. And the bell rings and they emerge from their blackout and they're like, oh, wow, I think I just entered jhana. It's like, no, that wasn't jhana. That was just blacking out. That's not samadhi. It's not anything even close to samadhi. It's actually a complete absence of mindfulness. Whereas in samma samadhi, so in states of jhana, your mindfulness is the most sharp, intense, and clear it's ever been. There's no reduction in awareness. In fact, there's the opposite. There's an incredible intensification of awareness. But that intensity of awareness is coupled by complete stillness and unification of mind. So this is what defines samma samadhi. There's not at any point a loss of mindfulness or a disappearance of consciousness when one is practicing samadhi correctly. So samadahang chittang asase samiti sikkati. So as one breathes in, one collects, unifies, stabilizes the mind. As one breathes out, one collects, stabilizes, and unifies the mind. So bringing the mind deeper and deeper into samadhi with each breath. And the next one is vimocha yang chittang asase samiti sikkati. So vimocha yang means liberating. So liberating the mind with each breath. And it's important here to distinguish between different kinds of liberation. So usually if we just say the word liberation in Buddhism, so the word vimutti, liberation, then usually we're talking about final liberation, which is full awakening. So liberation from all delusion, liberation from all dukkha, that's usually what we mean. But the Buddha also used the word liberation to talk about when the mind is temporarily liberated from all hindrances. So when the mind is completely free of the 5 hindrances, then the Buddha called that momentary liberation or temporary liberation. So you might have heard this term, temporary liberation or momentary liberation. So that's referring to a samadhi state in which the mind is temporarily free of defilement. Temporarily, there is no desire or aversion in the mind. Temporarily, there's no dullness or distraction in the mind. So this is necessary for entering jhana. So the mind must be free of the 5 hindrances in order to enter even the first jhana, let alone anything higher. And it's also a very important component of developing any degree of samadhi. It's necessary to diminish the 5 hindrances to a substantial degree in order to get any amount of samadhi. So again, the 5 hindrances are interest in sensuality. Is the first one. The second one is aversion. The third one is dullness. The fourth one is agitation, and the fifth one is skepticism. So these are the 5 hindrances which prevent us from gaining samadhi and also obstruct the arising of wisdom. So the most common explanation for this line of the 16 steps, so this now is step 12, step 12. Vimochayang chittang asase samiti is one liberates the mind from the 5 hindrances. So the temporary liberation of mind. And this is important because the next 4 steps, the final 4 steps of the 16-step meditation instructions are what we would more properly call liberating wisdom, the wisdom that leads to complete freedom of mind. So these next 4 are a series of insight meditation instructions. So the first one, Ānāpānasati Sutta sikkati. So anicca is impermanence, and anupasi means to observe. So one trains oneself, I will breathe in, observing impermanence. I will breathe out, observing impermanence. So cultivating a direct awareness of the insubstantiality of all things, a direct awareness of the constantly changing, essenceless nature of every part of body and mind. So a direct awareness that every part of body mind is constantly changing and therefore not solid, not persistent, not stable, not quite real. One of the similes the Buddha used, which is very evocative, is the simile of a lump of foam. So if you have a lump of foam, a handful of bubbles, it looks like a solid object, but when you pay closer attention, you realize there's not really anything there. It's completely empty and hollow. So the Buddha said in the same way, physical form is like a lump of foam. It looks solid when you don't pay much attention. It seems like a solid object. But if you try to grab the bubbles, you realize there's not really anything there. When you pay closer attention, you see that they're hollow. They're empty. So he said it's the same with the body or with any physical form. It seems like a real solid object, but that's just because we're not paying enough attention. When you pay close attention, you recognize that there's not really anything here. It's completely empty and hollow. There's no solid essence here at all. And it's the same with the mind. So then the Buddha, this is from the Ānāpānasati Sutta, the simile of the lump of foam. Then the Buddha gives 4 similes for the mind. And each one of these similes is also quite evocative. But the final one he gives, let's see if I can remember them. There's the mirage, the magician's trick. What are the other 2?
Foam.
I already mentioned foam. Oh, bubble. Yeah, bubble popping on the surface of water. There's one more. What's that?
Dew.
Mm-hmm.
No,
that's a different sutta. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The mirage, the magician's trick, the bubble. There's one more. Anyway, but the mirage is a great example. So when you see a mirage in a distance, it seems like something real, but that's an illusion. It's a misunderstanding. It's a misperception. And when you get a better look, you realize that it's not what you thought it was. So this also is an image that the Buddha uses to communicate the emptiness of all phenomena. It looks like a real thing until you pay closer attention, and then you realize it's not at all what you thought it was. What's that?
That's the Ānāpānasati.
Yeah, it's a different sutta. Sutta. Anyway, I can look it up later. So again, as you breathe in, observing impermanence. As you breathe out, observing impermanence. And in many suttas, the Buddha actually says that alone is sufficient for attaining full awakening. So the perception of impermanence alone, if you have sufficiently strong samadhi, the perception of impermanence is enough to attain full awakening. So actually, usually this is the way of practice that I teach, is to develop samadhi through mindfulness of the body, and then to develop insight through recognizing impermanence, because this is the way the Buddha most commonly taught. Then the next step is virāga-anupassi asasisamiti sikkati. So here it comes down to the word viraga. There's a couple ways of interpreting this word. The word viraga literally means dispassion. So the absence of lust, the absence of passion. So viraga is when one recognizes that no true happiness can be found in any part of samsara. So then naturally one starts to lose one's passion for the things of the world. One starts to lose one's lust for any kind of sensory experience. So contemplating dispassion or observing dispassion is you're recognizing that there is nothing in the world which is worth being passionate about. There's nothing in the world which is worth lusting after. So this is a way of training the mind. So the other interpretation of the word viraga, which I have to say I'm very doubtful about, but I'll mention it because it's a common interpretation. So the word viraga is sometimes interpreted to mean fading. And this comes from a rather different interpretation of the word viraga. So again, the word raga in the suttas, it always means lust or passion. But it is etymologically related to the word that means color, and specifically to the word that means dye. So like if you dye a piece of cloth, there's the word which means dye for coloring cloth. So then there's a very old kind of wordplay, pun, which is saying that viraga can also mean when the color fades away from something. So then viraga is sometimes translated as fading. But to me, this is getting too caught up in word games, and it's really missing the directness of what the Buddha is saying here. As far as I can tell, the Buddha actually is talking about dispassion. So observing passion disappearing from the mind, observing the inherent undesirability of all experience. And the mind naturally moves into this state of dispassion. And dispassion is an extremely peaceful state of mind. So sometimes when people hear the word dispassion in English, it brings up a sense of being kind of slightly annoyed or apathetic. But that's not the meaning of this word in Pali. In Pali, the idea is that raga is something which is upsetting and disturbing. So viraga is to be free from that disturbance. So for example, one of the similes the Buddha uses for raga is like boiling water. So when water is boiling, it's very agitated and disturbed. It's not peaceful and clear. But when the water stops boiling, then it settles back into this clear, peaceful stillness. So in the same way, when our mind is filled with raga, when it's filled with lust and passion, it's like boiling water. But as the raga fades from the mind, then the mind becomes like still, cool, clear water. So a very peaceful, serene state of mind. And a mind which is able to see things clearly. Then the next one, and by the way, another reason why I take viraga to simply mean dispassion is because if it meant fading, then that would be effectively synonymous with perceiving impermanence. So it would be redundant. So again, I think we should just take the word viraga at its most common meaning rather than putting a more fanciful interpretation on it. The next item on the list is nirodhanupasi, asasisamiti sikati. So as one breathes in and out, one trains oneself, I will observe cessation. So nirodha is cessation. So cessation is used to mean the ending of any phenomenon. This is happening in every moment. Every moment, everything ceases. Every single moment. So, you know, the doomsday prophets who go on with the sign saying the end is near. Well, no, it's not near, it's now. The end is now. And now, and now, and now. And the end is every moment, actually. Every moment, everything comes to an end. And the next moment, it all starts up again and then ends. So this is our experience, is moment after moment is beginning and ending, beginning and ending, beginning and ending, moment after moment. And normally we're so fixated on the arising of things, the beginning of things, the appearance of things, that we don't pay any attention at all to the ending, the cessation, which is happening all the time. We just don't pay any heed to it. So the Buddha here is really encouraging us, pay attention to the ending of things, the cessation of sensation, the cessation of perceptions, the cessation of thoughts, the cessation of experiences, the cessation of every aspect of body-mind, because this is happening every single moment. For example, this also comes up in the Kaccanagotta Sutta that we recite every morning here at the monastery. The Buddha says, one who wisely sees cessation does not believe that things exist. He also says, one who wisely sees arising doesn't believe that things don't exist. So these are the two delusions, the delusion that things exist and the delusion that things don't exist. So we're trying not to fall into either delusion. But of the two, the more common delusion is the delusion that things exist, which is why for most people, the important thing is to focus on observing cessation, because for most people, that's where their biggest blind spot is. And then finally, the 16th step in the meditation instructions is patinissagganupassi, asisisamiti sikkati. So as one breathes in and out, one trains oneself. I will observe relinquishment. Patinissagga means relinquishing, renouncing, letting go. So we're observing how the mind is letting go moment after moment. So turning attention to the releasing, the relinquishing, the letting go that's happening. So actually, as you do the 15 previous steps, then the mind naturally starts letting go. It starts relinquishing its white-knuckled grip on samsara. And you can turn attention to that relinquishing, that letting go, and you can see how peaceful it is, how pleasant it is, how wonderful and delightful it is to finally start letting go. And the more you appreciate the delightfulness of relinquishment, the delightfulness of letting go, then the more the mind inclines towards letting go. And this can lead all the way to relinquishing one's self-identity, which is the first critical step in awakening, is the relinquishment of self-identity. So that's the end of the 16 steps. So then from here, the Buddha goes on to talk about how it relates to the factors of awakening, the bojjhangas, how it relates to the satipatthanas, and so on. So he relates it to a number of the other doctrinal sets that we commonly hear about in Buddhism. But we don't have time for all of that today. So maybe another time I'll go through the relationship there. What I do want to emphasize before ending for the morning is that although these 16 steps are framed as being around mindfulness of breathing, it also works just as well with many other meditation techniques. So you can use exactly the same 16-step framework with mindfulness of the body rather than mindfulness of breathing. And it works extremely well. You can use it with metta. You can apply these same 16 steps with practicing metta. You can apply the same 16 steps with practicing with the 6 elements. So although it's framed as mindfulness of breathing, you can actually use the same framework with many other meditation methods as well and get extremely good results. So at this time, I'd like to switch to taking questions. So first we can respect the sutta with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Now I'll take whatever questions you have. So I notice there's a lot of people joining in. That's great. So hello to Kumu, Alexandra, Kauser Friend, Sonia, Mike, John, Amaranta, Piti Suka, Olga, Jayanta, Michael, Si Yong, Bhante Sankitcha, hello, Venerable, Charles Lee, Ranang, Tuhet, Suba, Ranji, Dave, Shui, Naval, Kasan, Yume, Cordelia, and Ratna. Hello, everyone. Wow, lots of people, really lovely. And the first question we hear, Sunya asks, When you move on to the next step, do you release awareness of the previous step or retain it? For example, do you retain awareness of the length of the breath when going on to chitta awareness? So I tend to think of it as an increasing refinement of attention. Are you still aware of the length of the breath? Yes, but you're not particularly interested. So you're moving the mind towards an increasingly refined present moment awareness. Whereas length of breath is something which is taking place over time. But as one's samadhi strengthens, one is becoming more and more focused on now, rather than about past and future. So length of breath is a function of past and future. So that naturally starts to fall away as you progress with this meditation. And P.T. Sukha says, I have a question regarding the two terms, vitakka and vichara. Are these two identical to deliberate and unintentional thoughts? That's one way of interpreting it. So the terms vitakka and vichara, there's many ways of interpreting it. The interpretation I lean strongly towards these days, though, is that vitakka means verbal thought and vichara means non-verbal thought. And the main reason for this is because this is how these words are used elsewhere in the suttas. So it always felt strange to me that when many teachers would explain jhana, they would come to these two words and they would just explain these two words in ways that they're never used anywhere else in the suttas. That always felt strange to me. So vitakka simply means thought, verbal thought. And vichara means a wandering or examination. So it's when the mind is wandering around something. So I take it to mean exactly the same thing. And first jhana is when the mind is just starting to become really stable, but there's still a certain amount of background noise, a certain amount of background activity in the mind. And that's what we call vitakka and vichara. And vitakka and vichara are called the enemy of jhana. So they're not something that you deliberately try to cultivate. They're the enemies of jhana because they're so close to distraction, which is why you're trying to let go of vitakka and vichara in order to progress into second jhana and onwards. So I would actually say that by the time you get to first jhana, both vitakka and vichara are in the domain of unintentional thought. But so it's the background noise in the mind. You're not deliberately doing it anymore, but it's still capable of distracting you if you turn your attention towards it. If you turn your attention towards it, then you'll start losing your concentration and slipping back into thinking. So those are my thoughts on vitakka vichara. And Renang is asking, from which country is the monk now preaching? I am in the United States of America. And Kumo asks, is bringing the body into a euphoric state difficult because in daily life we try to develop the opposite, worldly equanimity? Your advice for euphoria to happen easily without resistance? I would say that euphoria is difficult to develop because we're not used to doing it. We're used to pleasure coming to us as a result of external causes. So the fact that you can produce pleasure within yourself purely as an act of will is something which is for many people a very foreign concept. Most people think if I eat the right foods and I do the right exercises, then my body feels good. So it's clearly from the outside world. The pleasure is coming from the food and the chemicals and the exercise. Like that's what's making me feel good. That's how most people think. But in developing euphoric meditation, so in developing deep samadhi, we're starting to produce pleasure within ourselves purely as an act of will. So this is very different from how most people relate to euphoria. So I think it's difficult primarily because it's something that we're not used to doing. So it's a new skill that we're trying to learn. And also it's a completely different framework of understanding pleasure than what we're used to. So my advice for it to happen easily without resistance, there is no easy. If this was easy, everyone would be enlightened by now. This is not easy. It's really hard. So if you want it to happen easily without resistance, I'll give you an easy way. But advance warning, it's really painful. But you want the fast shortcut? Here's the fast shortcut. Do periods of continuous sitting for 4 hours straight. At least once a day. Every day. And during those 4 hours, don't move at all. No matter how much your body hurts, don't move at all. And also don't try to escape the pain. Be completely present with it. This is the shortcut. It is agonizingly painful, but it's the shortcut. It works, by the way. I speak from experience. It works. But be prepared to feel worse pain than you've ever felt in your entire life. It's amazing how painful it is just to sit still for a few hours. Kazer friend asks, is there always sukha when there is piti? Yes. But usually the piti is so strong that it kind of obscures sukha. So piti is very intense and exciting. So the mind tends to fixate on the piti. And it doesn't pay so much attention to sukha. As for how to tell them apart, I think I explained that sufficiently yesterday. Naval asks, can mindfulness of the entire breath be substituted with just mindfulness of abdomen rising and falling, as some schools practice? So I actually never said mindfulness of the entire breath. I said mindfulness of the entire body, your whole physical body, not the breath, but the whole body. As for focusing just on your abdomen, I mean, see what results you get. Again, the risk is that when you narrow your attention, that you are obstructing mindfulness. So I think it's fine to focus on your abdomen as long as you maintain an awareness of your whole body. It's fine to focus on the tip of your nose as long as you maintain awareness of your whole body. It's fine to focus on anything. You can focus on your left toenail if you want to, as long as you maintain awareness of your entire body. So it doesn't matter where you center your mind, as long as you maintain awareness of your entire body. So the center point, you pick something that works for you to center the mind on and to hold the mind steady, centered on that point. It doesn't matter where. But you want to be very careful that you're not constricting the mind, because if you constrict the mind, then again, what you're moving towards is blacking out rather than towards brightening and sharpening the mind. So actually the schools, I'm not going to start naming any names, but there's one well-known school of meditation that teaches mindfulness of abdomen rising and falling. And in that particular school of meditation, they also say that blacking out during meditation means that you've attained awakening, which I don't know where the heck they get that idea of, because that's literally the exact opposite of awakening. So this blacking out during meditation is actually a symptom of constricting one's mindfulness to the point where mindfulness disappears entirely. So blacking out is not a sign of wisdom. It's a sign that your mindfulness has been crushed into oblivion. That's not a good sign. That's a really bad sign. So you want to keep your mindfulness open and broad. So your mind stays alert and sharp and fully aware. So again, it's fine if you want to center your attention on your abdomen, but keep your awareness broad and open, including your whole body. And Yume says, I've always practiced insight meditation. There are many things that people mean when they say insight meditation. So that alone is not enough to tell me that much. And they continue, for the last 6 months, I've used the Mahasi style noting mantra, rising, falling, sitting, etc. I want to try practicing samatha. So my idea was to adopt the mantra by just noting breathing in, breathing out, while maintaining awareness of the full body. Is this wise? In the beginning stages, that'll be fine, but at some point you need to stop the words. The words become an obstacle to deep samadhi. Words are a form of chitta sankara, so you do need to stop those eventually. Otherwise, you never get into deep samadhi. This is one of the huge problems with the Mahasi method. The noting method is because you're constantly producing chitta sankara, which means you can never get into deep concentration. You can never enter Samma Samadhi, which means you're always missing one component of the Eightfold Path. That's a huge problem. So in the early stages, when your mind is very distracted, then using a mantra like breathing in, breathing out, that's fine. Sometimes if my mind is very busy, I'll just use the word focus. So I'll just be repeating focus, focus, focus. And similarly, that can be useful when the mind is very chaotic. And it's very useful for helping to reduce the chaos level of the mind. So if you want to use breathing in, breathing out, again, that's fine. But eventually, when the mind starts to settle down a bit and there's less distraction, less thinking, then stop the mantra and just focus on feeling your body directly. And you'll notice that then the mind becomes much sharper and calmer. P.T. Sukha says, when seeing these unintentional arising thoughts, it is okay to proceed like this. I don't know what you mean by proceed like this. Yeah, you'd have to clarify. Then we have someone with a name in Sinhalese characters, which I'm sorry, I don't remember how to read Sinhalese letters. I used to know, but I forgot. That was years ago. Asking, what is teaching about love in Buddhism? So that's a bit off topic. We're talking about mindfulness and breathing. If you'd like to ask about love, I recommend that you come to the Monk Chat session, which happens this evening. So 7:30 New York City time, 7:30 p.m. So if you come then, that's the time to ask all the off-topic questions you have. Egod asks, is there a pleasurable shortcut? Yes, it's called jhana. That's the pleasurable shortcut. In other words, no, there's not a shortcut. Sorry. There's pleasure, but no shortcut. Yeah, there are no shortcuts in Buddhism. I'm very sorry to tell you. There's no quick, easy path. There's only the slow, difficult path. That's all we've got. The good news is that it works. It's slow, it's hard, but it's pleasant and it works. So that's worth doing. Any questions from the residents here? Yeah, go ahead.
Going back to the use of the mantra, it seems for me that it's not an intentional dropping, then it automatically will drop. As the mind stills, the feeling arises, so the mind just automatically, like there's not an intentional dropping of the mantra, and it seems to go automatically to that feeling. So is that typical? Is that what you recommend? Is that usually what happens, that it the mind automatically drops the mantra?
Not
Or does it have
necessarily.
to be like, okay, now I'm going to focus on this feeling?
Not necessarily. So if you're quite, if somebody has a certain amount of proficiency with samadhi practice, then it can happen that way, where they just naturally drop the mantra when they're ready to, but not always. So it's good to constantly pay attention because you do get to a point where maybe you begin with using a mantra to support your practice, and then after about 10, 15, 20 minutes or so, you're still using the mantra, but it seems like you're hitting a wall. Like the samadhi is not improving. And it's like, what's going on? Nothing's, and then you're like, oh, it's the mantra. So then you stop and you focus directly on the body. And then your samadhi starts progressing again. So you do need to pay attention because you can get to a point where the mantra is obstructing your samadhi and you're not dropping the samadhi automatically. Then you do need to do it deliberately. Yeah, so it might happen automatically, but you might need to do it deliberately. Okay? Okay, anything else? Yeah.
So at like the doorstep to like a marked change in consciousness where things are starting to get really electric, the mind, which is usually like is calm, like it perks up, I guess, because of like the change in what's going on. Oh, what's this? What's this? And that drops it out of concentration. Is it simply a matter of just going back there over and over again until it's like, whatever, and can keep moving?
Yeah, so, and that's actually quite common when PT first starts to arise, the euphoria first starts to arise. If you're not familiar with it, then you can get really excited. And then that excitement produces agitation, which breaks your samadhi.
Yeah.
That's very common.
Okay.
So the thing is, when the euphoria starts to arise, try to remain calm. So be present with it, be interested in it, but stay calm.
Okay.
And I say that, but you're still going to get excited and drop out of it the first few times. That's normal.
I'll do what I can.
Yeah, but try to stay calm.
Okay.
If you can stay calm, then it will keep growing and keep building. And that's a good sign that your samadhi is developing well. Yeah. Yeah, very common problem. Don't worry about it.
Okay. I kind of figured it would be.
Yeah.
So in Buddhism, how is something like jhana verified?
Through your own experience.
Yeah, but maybe you just delusional. You think, oh, I have jhana, I have this stage, I have that stage. So how would you check it from a Buddhist perspective?
Well, usually what you do is you talk to meditation teachers, describe your experience in as much detail as you can, and ask them for their advice, ask them for their evaluation, and see what they say. And also it can help to talk to multiple teachers because different teachers will have their own perspectives. So it's just as a general rule, I always recommend talking to multiple teachers. Don't rely on only one teacher, but talk to multiple teachers so you can get multiple perspectives. Yeah, so if your own experience seems to be lining up with what the Buddha talked about in the suttas, don't go by what it says in the commentaries. The commentaries are completely insane when it comes to jhana. Like they just started making stuff up. I don't know where they get it from. Don't go by the Visuddhimagga. Again, they just started making stuff up. Completely wacky. Go with what's in the suttas. If your experience seems to line up with what's in the suttas, then talk to some teachers. Say, this is what's going on. What do you think? Listen to what they have to say. Ultimately, it comes down to your own direct experience. But the input and advice that we receive from senior teachers, it can be really, really helpful. So that's not to be skipped.
Okay. And also, so how, when we're thinking about jhanas and progressing along the path, how do we practice detachment? And, oh, I can't wait to get this. I'm going to get this next step. I really need to try and get this. So how is detachment involved in doing that and then going along there?
Because you're remembering that each step is just a step along the way, that there's a further goal beyond. So like when the Buddha was talking about his own practice in the, oh gosh, it's near the beginning of the Majjhima Nikaya, where he talks about how like I entered the first jhana and I was like, oh, this is really good, but there's something better. There's an escape higher than this. This is not the final goal. And then he would enter the second jhana and he'd be like, oh, wow, this is even better. This is great. But there's something beyond this. There is an escape, which is even more sublime than this one. So that's what we remind ourselves. Like, yeah, each step along the path has its own perks, but there's something better. It's just a stepping stone that brings you to the next one. It's like when you're going up a flight of stairs. You get on the first step of the staircase and you're like, great, I'm higher up than I used to be. Wonderful. I'll just stop here, get out my sleeping bag and here's my home. Of course not. You recognize that this step itself is not that important. It's just a way of getting to the next step, which gets you to the next step, which gets you eventually to the top of the staircase. The goal is to get to the top of the staircase. The steps along the way are not so important. They're just the path to getting to the top. So it's the same. We practice jhana not for its own sake, but we practice jhana because the Buddha said that this is an important component of progressing towards full liberation of mind. So of course it's normal that we tend to get attached to stages of the path. That's because we're prone to attachment. That's the nature of the unenlightened mind. It's always trying to latch on to things. So we even try to latch on to the path itself. The path which is all about non-attachment and letting go, we latch on. That's to be expected. So we need to keep reminding ourselves that our goal is not first jhana. Our goal is not second jhana. Our goal is not any jhana, in fact. Our goal is full awakening. And cultivating jhana is something that we do in order to help us move towards full awakening. Does that make sense? Does that help?
I wonder, can we do this without any care for jhana or for progress? You know?
Not based on what I read in the suttas. So if you're not interested in developing the steps of the path, so jumping directly to the final goal, for most people, that doesn't work terribly well. There is an entire school of Buddhism built around that, though. It's called Chan. So jumping directly to the final step, that's kind of what they do. And that's a very delightful, but also very difficult form of practice. So I have a lot of affection for Chan. I like it a lot. But it's also very difficult to practice if you don't have a pretty solid foundation and the step-by-step methods.
So I guess the question is, can we walk the steps with diligent practice and with a lot of attention to it, but not particularly thinking about it in terms of, like, will it happen naturally if we practicing diligently according to the teachings, according to the suttas, but not with that mindset of, okay, I'm moving towards jhana.
Yeah. And if you develop the conditions for samadhi, then samadhi happens by itself. So this is another way of talking. So for example, Ajahn Brahm, he actually talks mostly about developing the conditions for the arising of samadhi. And then the way he puts it is that samadhi just kind of happens all by itself. But that's because you're creating the conditions for it to arise. So that's another way of talking, is you just keep creating the supportive conditions. And then samadhi happens all by itself. Ajahn Chah also would often talk in this way. So Ajahn Chah, he would sometimes talk about jhana, but mostly he just talked about creating the conditions for samadhi. And then naturally, if you create the right conditions, then the mind will progress towards deep states of samadhi, which is what we mean when we say jhana. We just mean deep samadhi. So that's the other thing, is that sometimes when we say the word jhana, then people start thinking it's this magical state where like one moment you're totally normal and then bam, first jhana, something totally radically different from what you had half a second ago. But it's actually not. I think of it more as like a continuous progression. So like a continuous increase. And somewhere around here is where you cross the line between 0 jhana and first jhana. But it's not like nothing, bam, first jhana. It's more like a gradual building up, and somewhere along that slope is what we would call entry into first jhana. But it's not necessarily a radical change. It's more like you go from 49% samadhi to 50% samadhi, and 50% samadhi is what we call first jhana. But 49% is still incredibly good, incredibly strong samadhi, extremely close to 50% samadhi. It's not radically different. So there is a definable stage, which we call first jhana, but it's not radically different from your state of mind right before that. So it's important not to get too mystical in how we think about jhana. It just means deep samadhi. So if you actually just sit down and focus on your body for a few seconds, then you've got some samadhi. Well, jhana is just that times 1,000. But it's the same flavor of samadhi. It's just magnified to a very powerful degree.
Is nimitta always a part of this? Is this
So the word nimitta, as it's used in the suttas, simply means your object of attention. It just means whatever you're paying attention to. So like right now, my nimitta is this water bottle. So this idea of nimitta meaning bright light or image that appears right before you enter first jhana, that's not in the suttas. That's something from the fanciful imagination of later authors. To be perfectly blunt here. Anything else? Okay, we'll end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And we'll see you this evening for